We have arrived at the final game before the All-Star break for the Memphis Grizzlies. They take on the Utah Jazz tonight. But before we get there, a moment to reflect on the season to this point. We're going to look at some surprises, some disappointments, how the Grizzlies have fared to this point, and where to go from here. All that on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Lock in, won't you?
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host for this episode, Joe Mullinax. We are proud members here at Locked On Grizzlies of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com. Promo code Locked On. Again, wherever you get your podcast, free and available, subscribe, rate, review. We're also on YouTube. We continue to have great success over on YouTube with our recent episodes. Obviously, the podcast itself, audio-wise, is doing well, but the YouTube page has really taken off over the last week. Thank you so much. However you're making the show part of your NBA content experience, it is much appreciated by myself, Joe Mullinax. Also appreciated by my co-host, DeMichael Cole. He announced it publicly yesterday on his social media. So I'm comfortable in saying to our listeners, in case you're not on Twitter, DeMichael's older brother passed away recently. That is what DeMichael has been having to go through, unfortunately, with he and his family losing his older brother. That happened yesterday that DeMichael announced it. So my thoughts are with DeMichael, getting to know him over the last year since he's come back to Memphis, of course, and then being a partner with him on Locked On Grizzlies after leaving Grizzly Bear Blues. He's a phenomenal writer over at the Commercial Appeal. He does a really great job as the beat writer on the Memphis Grizzlies, but I've been really impressed with his professionalism, the way that he carries himself. We've really developed a strong rapport on the show. At least I think we have. And I know that he's going through a lot right now with his family. I consider him a friend at this point, and I wish him well, his family well. My thoughts and condolences go out to them. DeMichael will be back when he's ready to be back, and we will welcome him back happily. And he talked about on Twitter how his older brother was so proud of the work that DeMichael was doing, covering the Grizzlies and covering the NBA. And I know he wants to get back to that, and he will, but he wants to honor his brother and spend time with his family at this time. So we're going to keep the ship rolling. I'll be here with you every step of the way. DeMichael will be back, but I just wanted to make sure I updated you on that very important stuff. So again, our thoughts, our condolences to DeMichael and his family. So I'm solo here on this episode, and it's tough to make a segue out of that tough news. But as far as the Memphis Grizzlies, which is the main reason you're tuning in to this podcast, this video, however you're taking in the content, the Memphis Grizzlies are a team that is in an interesting place in the Western Conference, still currently the number 2 seed, but closer to the number 3 Sacramento Kings than they are the number 1 Denver Nuggets. Both LA teams, Denver themselves, you have the Golden State Warriors, you have the Phoenix Suns, obviously, with Kevin Durant now. So coming out of the All-Star break, how the West is won is going to be fascinating to watch. But we've got a whole week of episodes coming up about non-game related topics that we can peruse and go through the scope of the Western Conference. I want to reflect on the season that's been so far. And in this part of the show, I want to focus on surprises, positive things that have been really fun to watch unfold. And I'm going to avoid talking about Ja Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Desmond Bane, because I think those are 3 guys that it's been proven now that's your core moving forward, right? If they weren't willing to put Desmond Bane in a trade for Kevin Durant or Mikal Bridges, that tells you what they think of Desmond Bane, what they think of Ja Morant, obviously, what they think of Jaren Jackson Jr. Those guys being good at basketball is no longer a surprise, right? So I'm going to skip them for this portion of the show, and they're certainly not disappointments. So I wouldn't talk about them in the later parts of the program either when we preview Utah, Memphis towards the end of the show. that's when I'll bring Dez and Ja and Jaren back up. The first surprise that I want to cover is the importance of Steven Adams. Not necessarily that Steven Adams is still a good basketball player, because that's not really that surprising at this point anymore. We've seen what he's capable of doing to help this team win. As a screener, as a rebounder, he's phenomenal. He's one of the very best in the NBA, especially when it comes to offensive rebounding. But his importance to this team in terms of on-off efficiency differentials, his importance to this team, especially offensively, he is putting up one of his best seasons ever in that area. One of the best seasons he has had was with Oklahoma City in the 2018-2019 season. You could argue it was his best season ever, a plus 9.5 efficiency differential, according to Cleaning the Glass. He had a plus 9.8 offensive rating. Right now, the Memphis Grizzlies are at a plus 8.2. This is his best mark since then offensively. And when you think offensive prowess, you don't think Steven Adams. You don't think this is a guy that is so impactful to the Grizzlies' ability to scoring the basketball. But when you take a moment and really ponder it, it makes sense. He's so good at offensive rebounds, creating additional opportunities for this team to score, that it puts him in a position to see that increase in numbers. And he also, again, is an excellent screener, creating room for Ja Morant to work with. And all you need to give Ja Morant is a sliver, right? Just a little bit of space, and he can create all sorts of issues for the opposing team. So it was surprising that he has been that important to the offense, given the fact he doesn't really have a perimeter game, given the fact he has a basic post game at this point. And I don't mean that to be insulting. That is not a focus of who Steven Adams is. He's good in the pick and roll, excellent screener for both on and off ball players. And he is elite as a rebounder. That's been talked about here, there, and everywhere. But just how much that matters to Memphis winning basketball games. During the games that Adams has been out, Memphis is 3-7. He has been that important. They miss him terribly. And guys that come in for him, like a Santi Aldama, like a Xavier Tillman, even if they're having good seasons, we'll talk more about Santi in a moment, they're not able to replicate what Steven Adams does. Xavier Tillman is not able to do what Steven Adams does. He's big, he's physical, he is able to be that enforcer on both ends of the floor for Memphis. It allows for Jaren to be more of a free-flowing player. Jaren can get his blocks and his defensive numbers regardless. But there's no denying that Jaren is in a different free safety kind of role when Steven Adams is out there. So the importance of Steven Adams to this team, you could argue he's the most important guy outside of the big three. And that's pretty shocking. I think it's surprising. Maybe you disagree. You can let me know in the comments. But I'm not saying that Steven Adams isn't important. I'm saying that he is so important. I knew he was important, but this important? That's surprising. Another major surprising piece to this season so far in terms of individual performance is Santi Aldama. Santi Aldama being a guy who I wrote about in my Substack today over at Written in the Dark. He's the ninth man, right? You go into the playoffs today, which obviously won't happen because that'd be weird. But let's say Memphis and Utah was a playoff series, game 1 tonight. 9-man rotation. You got your starting 5 if Steven Adams is healthy. And then you've got Tyus Jones, Luke Kennard, Brandon Clark. Santi's your 9th guy. And that wasn't supposed to be Santi, right? We'll talk more about who that was supposed to be later in the show. But it wasn't supposed to be Santi. Santi is in a spot where he has to be put on the floor somewhere, even if it's as a wing, because of what he can do offensively. His defense is still a liability. He struggles in that area pretty tremendously at times. One of the worst defenders on the team, both by the eye test and in terms of his overall numbers. Teams shoot better when he's on the floor. But he is one of the few consistent three-point threats. Obviously, now that you have Luke Kennard next to Desmond Bane or alongside Desmond Bane, that's not as true. But Santi and Jaren are the next tier down in terms of guys that you have to respect being able to shoot the 3 ball. And that spacing matters a lot, especially in half-court offense where the Grizzlies struggle especially. So you can't just say that Santi Aldama, the 30th pick in the 2021 NBA draft, you can't just write him off anymore, right? You can't just say, he's not going to – he's a project. Maybe he's the end of the rotation guy. No. I think as of this moment, he is in the playoff rotation. And I think he gets more minutes than, say, a Tyus Jones, at least if it was my playoff rotation. because Bain and Kennard can play those minutes as well, like we talked about on yesterday's show. Santi Aldama, Steven Adams, their significance and importance in this season to Memphis being the number 2 seed in the Western Conference, those are surprises. We're going to talk disappointments next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Prize Picks. In tonight's game against the Utah Jazz, again, the last contest for Memphis before the All-Star break, I would take Ja Morant to score more than 27.5 points. I would take Jaren Jackson Jr. to make more than 1.5 threes. I would take Desmond Bane to dish out more than 3.5 assists. You get the picture. I love that Prize Picks does their entries in this way. You can pick 2 to 6 players if they score more than or less than a pass or assist, more or less than, whatever the stat might be. If they do that according to your pick through their Prize Picks projections, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. There's no competing against other people here. It's just you against the projections available. NBA, Major League Baseball getting ready to start back up. NHL hockey's at its peak. Almost every sport under the sun can be found under Prize Picks. They can have safe and fast choices made in 60 seconds or less. You can withdraw your money quickly, and it's operational in over 30 states as well as in Canada. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match. Really a fantastic deal, up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. It's that easy. Don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. We are talking disappointments going into the second half of the season with this last game before the All-Star break happening tonight on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host, Joe Mullinax, flying solo for the time being. We mentioned at the start of the show, DeMichael family bereavement. Unfortunately, the passing of his older brother. Our thoughts and our condolences go out to DeMichael and his family. We will hold down the fort while DeMichael is away as long as he needs to be away. We're talking Grizzlies basketball still, and we're talking the surprises and disappointments. In the first part of the show, we talked Santi Aldama, Steven Adams, 2 pretty major surprises, at least to me, in terms of their importance to the Grizzlies winning basketball games. Here, we're going to get a little bit negative. We're going to take a turn to negative Nancy Town. We're going to go Debbie Downer for a moment. We're going to talk disappointments, and I'm going to leave my disappointments off with someone that maybe you're not expecting, because I know a lot of you have a target for your disappointment, and I'll talk about him momentarily. But my disappointment is Tyus Jones. And I say that not because he's not the best backup point guard in the NBA. I think that's still true. I say that because he's the best backup point guard in terms of being a starter, and that success is not translating over to his reserve role. In about 300 minutes this season, 9 games total as a starter, he is shooting, Tyus Jones, a pretty darn impressive 51.9% from the field. He is shooting almost 48% from beyond the arc. He has a true shooting percentage of 61.1%, and he has a net rating of plus 15 and a rating per 200 possessions, so 100 possessions on either side of the court, of plus 4.6 as a starter. That is all thanks to Basketball Reference in terms of statistics. As a reserve player, he is shooting almost a whole 100 or 10 percentage points worse. 40.3% from the field, 35% from 3, which isn't that bad. He is struggling in terms of his net rating at plus 4 compared to what he is as a starter. And that plus minus 200 possessions that I mentioned a moment ago, he's at up 1.3. Tyus is doing an excellent job when he's filling in for Ja Morant. He is not playing up to the level that you would expect Tyus Jones to play up to when spelling Ja Morant. And the unfortunate part of this is Ja Morant and Tyus Jones continue to not really be able to be played together. So, in the absence of that, what does that mean for Tyus Jones? Obviously, he's still on the team. He wasn't traded at the trade deadline. If you're to believe Zach Kleiman, the GM of the Memphis Grizzlies, he says that Dillon Brooks was not a part of those trade conversations for the likes of Mikal Bridges and Kevin Durant. You got to get salary from somewhere. Maybe Tyus Jones was involved in those conversations. Is Tyus Jones not long for this Grizzlies world? Obviously, he's here for now. He's going to be a part of that playoff rotation when the time comes. But Tyus has not been very good as a reserve this year, at least not compared to what he's been in the past, and certainly not compared to what you expect him to do after signing that contract extension. You are counting on Tyus Jones to be able to produce with the bench. Has the bench been disappointing? Yes. That's why Luke Kennard is here, right? That's why Luke Kennard is a member of the Memphis Grizzlies, because the reserve group has not played up to what the expectations were. We'll talk about Ziaire Williams in a moment, but it's important to understand that Ziaire is a 21-year-old sophomore player in the NBA, whereas Tyus Jones is one of the most veteran members of the Memphis Grizzlies roster. More is expected of Tyus Jones. And again, in the 9 games that he's been a starter, he's been fantastic. Fantastic play. He's filled in admirably for Ja. But he's not going to start in front of Ja Morant. So unless rotations are tweaked, and I wrote about this over at Written in the Dark, my Substack, if Tyus becomes the first sub for Ja and you get Tyus as many minutes with the starting group, Bane and Brooks and Jaren Jackson Jr. and Steven Adams, as many minutes as you can, aside from that, how are you gonna maximize Tyus? He hasn't shown the ability this season with reserve players to be able to be the 6th or 7th best guy on the floor. That is a disappointment for me. I am disappointed in that. I expected more out of Tyus Jones in that role. Being the best backup point guard in the NBA doesn't mean just being a spot starter. It means that you have to fill those minutes when Morant's not on the floor and be productive. Tyus has not been that to this point, to the level that he should be. The other disappointment is the one that you're probably more in line with agreeing with me on, and that's Ziaire Williams. Now, I want to stress something to you, dear listener, dear viewer. I am not disappointed in terms of the draft pick, going all the way back to when he was selected 10th overall and saying that he shouldn't be in Memphis to begin with. That is not my line of thinking. I'm happy with Ziaire as that pick. Reports are that they wanted, Wagner, they wanted Giddey. Ziaire they settled on after trading up. Maybe that's true. I'm still cool with it because there are not very many 6'8", 6'9" true perimeter players. Ziaire Williams is not a stretch 4. He is not a big. He is a legitimate perimeter player at that size. That's rare. That's why people are willing to give up the stuff they're willing to give up for Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby and Kevin Durant. To have that size and be able to play in space that way on both ends of the floor, not everybody's got it. Sometimes you're just born with it, right? You're born with that physical ability. Ziaire Williams has that. But Ziaire has been asked to be things that he has not been in his entire career. Going back to high school in California, going back to his 1 year at Stanford, he hasn't been a successful three-point shooter. He hasn't been that his entire career. Does that mean he can never be a successful three-point shooter? Of course not. It means he needs to develop. It means he needs reps. And on a team that's trying to compete for an NBA championship, or at the very least to get out of the second round of the Western Conference playoffs, that's a tough thing to ask such a young player to do. But that's exactly what the Memphis Grizzlies planned on asking Ziaire to do, was to be that 8th man that now Luke Kennard is. Good on the Memphis Grizzlies for admitting their mistake. Good on Zach Kleiman. It's not a mistake to go and get an extra first-round pick, go get David Roddy. That's not necessarily the issue. The issue was saying that they believed that Ziaire Williams was going to be capable of being what they needed him to be as a playoff contending team at the age of 21, when they said from the beginning that Ziaire Williams was a project. This past summer, I said it was a heat check, and it turns out that it was a miss. Nobody bats 1,000. This front office isn't perfect. They traded for Justice Winslow, and I supported that move too. They were trying to get a guy that could contribute on the wing on the cheap, that fit in with the timeline of the Memphis Grizzlies. It didn't work out. They gave up very little. And, but Jay Crowder, he's amazing. No, he wasn't amazing in Memphis. Stop it. Look at the numbers. Stop buying Boss t-shirts and thinking that all caps quotes on Twitter are important. He was 29.3 from 3. Now pulling the wool over my eyes, Jay Crowder. Ziaire Williams needs to get better. But at least he's 21. At least there's reason to believe that given his frame and his physical talent, there will be improvement. Maybe he's never going to be a key starter for this team. They don't need him to be a key starter. They need him to be productive. They need him to be a strong role player for this team. And even that seems a ways away right now. But he's 21 years old. He was bet on, and injuries happen and all those sorts of things that maybe made this a little bit more difficult than it needed to be for Zaire this season. His progress was derailed to an extent. But that doesn't change the fact that the Grizzlies placed a bet on him, and it's come up null for this season. Again, that's why Luke Kennard's here. He's filling that void that Z is almost certainly leaving behind, at least for this season. So, disappointments. I'm disappointed that the Zaire Williams experience has not worked out this season the way that it was planned to work out by their own movements. And I'm disappointed in Tyus Jones. Hopefully, he gets things going coming out of the All-Star break. They need more from him, not just as a spot starter, but as a true backup, filling those minutes for Ja Morant when Ja is out of the game. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by my favorite protein bar, Built Bar. If you're looking for a delicious treat but don't want all the fat and calories, you got to try Built Bar. The holidays just got finished. I don't know about you. I'm trying to get in better shape. I'm on the treadmill, trying to get some exercise. I'm trying to eat a little healthier. You got to try Built, just like me. With Built, healthy is actually tasty. They are delicious and they're good for you. What makes them so good is that they are covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. They come in amazing flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, coconut almond. That's the one I like the best. I'm not sure how they do it, but it's a healthy bar that is only 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 17 grams of protein, and you don't even have to go to Built.com if you can't wait that long. You can go to Sam's Club. You can go to Walmart. You can get a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, coconut puffs. You can go and get brownie batter or churro at a Sam's Club. Built.com is still there as an option, dear listener, dear reader, or dear viewer. Still there as an option for you. But if you can't wait, you can go to Sam's Club, you can go to Walmart and get your hands on some Built Bars today. They're delicious. Give them a shot. When we come back, we will preview Utah-Memphis, the last game before the All-Star break for the Grizzlies. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host, Joe Mullinax, flying solo to Michael Cole, spending time with family, much needed time with family. Again, thinking of DeMichael and his family during these tough times. We're going to keep the ball rolling here on Locked On Grizzlies without him for the time being. Looking forward to him eventually returning. And the Grizzlies take on the Utah Jazz to close out the pre-All-Star slate. Utah looks a little bit different. Obviously, Mike Conley has departed. He's now with the Minnesota Timberwolves. The Jazz sent out pieces to the Lakers, Malik Beasley, Jared Vanderbilt. Russell Westbrook is now in Utah. Westbrook has not suited up for the Jazz yet, and he is not going to suit up for the Jazz in this game. If he gets bought out, that'll be during the All-Star break. If he decides to come back, he'll obviously do so after the All-Star break. So no Russell Westbrook in this game, but I'm not sure the Jazz need Russell Westbrook in this game to give the Grizzlies fits. They are still beating teams, even when they are giving off the direct vibe that they're not necessarily as concerned about contending or even making the playoffs or even the play-in at this stage. Lauri Markkanen, who's going to start the All-Star game, which is still a fascinating thing to say out loud. Kudos to him being a tremendous player this season. In the last game that Utah played, a 123-117 win over the Indiana Pacers, another team that's kind of doing a stealthy job tanking. Markkanen was 10 of 20. He had 11 rebounds, a remarkable amount, and he scored 29 points. Really an impressive job. He does really fantastic work, not just as a scorer, but as a rebounder. And he does so as part of a very large lineup for Memphis that makes me think maybe we see some Santi Aldama at the 3, obviously not necessarily as a starter, but with Steven Adams out, maybe it makes sense to try something along those lines. I'm curious how they'll do it. Kelly Olynyk, Lauri Markkanen, and then, of course, Walker Kessler, who has made everybody in Utah forget about Rudy Gobert. Maybe not quite that much. Gobert is a 3-time or so Defensive Player of the Year. He deserves a little bit more credit than that. But that's a big lineup, Olynyk, Markkanen, and Kessler. How they interact, how that matches up with what Memphis does. If they stick with Xavier Tillman as a starter, which I would not necessarily do. I can't stress that enough. I would not necessarily stick with X as that starter because he needs to actually get rebounds. He didn't do that in the last game. And obviously he needs to find his footing on the glass in order for Memphis to validate, in my opinion, him continuing to get that opportunity. But those 3 guys being a very large front court, that's going to be interesting to watch play out. Obviously, Jordan Clarkson is an instant microwave type of scorer that has given the Grizzlies fits in the past. How they line up against this Jazz team is really going to be interesting to watch unfold. And how the Grizzlies deploy Luke Kennard. After a couple of days, Kennard makes his debut in Boston, only hits 1 3, doesn't look overly active offensively, or at least as offensively active as I hoped he would be. And he still can be. He's played 1 game. They practiced on Tuesday, which is a good setup, getting Kennard more minutes and more reps with his new teammates. I'm hoping that over the All-Star break, obviously they'll have their own vacations that they do. Ja and Jaren are going to All-Star weekend. We'll talk about that on our next couple of episodes, obviously, going into Thursday and Friday, looking at All-Star festivities. That's going to be a lot of fun to see those 2 guys out there together, hopefully on the same team, but maybe playing against each other. That'd be kind of fun too on Sunday night. But I'm really intrigued by what this team does with Luke Kennard, because he has that elite shooting ability. He is one of the few players on this team that is truly elite at something, right? John Morant is elite at a few things. Jaren Jackson Jr., elite defender. Desmond Bane, elite 3-point shooter. Kennard is also an elite 3-point shooter. Tyus Jones is kind of a jack of all trades when he's doing well, as we talked about earlier in the show. He's not really an elite player. Brandon Clarke is an elite athlete, an elite finisher in the pick and roll, but again, 3s count more than 2s, and Kennard brings a level of spacing and contribution to the offense that nobody else aside from Desmond Bane really does. So I want to see them use him in that shooting role, because he will bring attention outside, creating more space for rollers and cutters, guys off of dribble penetration like John Morant. But I also want to see the ball in Kennard's hands. I want to see him have a chance to create a little bit in the pick and roll. During his season, his best seasons in Detroit, his 3rd season in Detroit in particular, he created a decent amount of his own offense off the dribble, pull-up jumpers, finding himself in a pick and roll situation where he has space and hitting a mid-range jumper. I want to see him do more of that stuff. I want to see him have that opportunity to expand his bag wider than it was with the Los Angeles Clippers. I don't think the Clippers utilized him fully. Doesn't mean that he's going to be Dillon Brooks as a defender, obviously. Doesn't mean he's not going to have his flaws on that end of the floor. But I'm hopeful that, again, in a small sample size, last game before All-Star break here, they're going to be away for a week or so. I am hopeful that Kennard will have an opportunity to show what he is physically capable of as a creator of offense off the dribble. And I hope to see him and Bane play together in that way. If you didn't gather from this episode, I haven't been overly impressed with Tyus Jones to this point in the season. If his minutes dwindled a little bit in exchange for opportunity for a guy like Luke Kennard to get a little bit more of a handle and to play next to Desmond Bane, a Bane-Kennard pairing or 3-way or threesome in the backcourt, that makes me a little more nervous defensively, right? Bane, Kennard, who's defending the best guy? Ooh, right? Is it Bane? And if it's Bane, ooh, double woo, right? Not the best setup for success. Offensive possession at the end of a game to get a bucket, yeah, I like those 3 together. Consistently together to try to play defense consistently again? Nah, not for me. So how do you get Bane and Kennard out there together? Well, it has to be with one of them as the point guard, one of them as the shooting guard. One of them as the primary facilitator, one of them as the secondary facilitator. And somebody's the odd man out in that spot. And for me right now, it's Tyus Jones. It's Tyus Jones. I would rather continue to get Santi Aldama minutes. I would rather see what Brandon Clarke can do as a pick and roll guy alongside Luke Kennard. Kennard can help space the floor. He helps create problems for opposing defenses more so than Tyus Jones, especially with Tyus in this reserve role. We have 1,000 minutes of sample size here, dear listener, dear viewer. We have 1,000 minutes. He is not doing as well as a reserve this season. So you play him with those starters as much as you can, and you see what Bane and Kennard can do together. That would be my goal for this game. But obviously Memphis has to defend better than they did against the Boston Celtics. They can't give up 20-plus made threes. If that happens, Memphis is going to lose. And guess what? The Jazz, between Olynyk and Markkanen and Clarkson, they have the capacity to do that to Memphis. They can hit those threes. They have the capacity to out-rebound the Grizzlies with Steven Adams out. We talked about how big that Utah front court is. Absolutely, that could be a problem for Memphis. It's not all sunshine and rainbows there. So it's teams with different trajectories. The Grizzlies are trying to continue to be at the top of the Western Conference. The Jazz are more than content with tumbling down a little bit into the lottery. But Memphis is going to have to play well to win this basketball game. Because again, Lauri Markkanen is having a legitimate all-star season, and the Jazz are more competitive than perhaps their roster suggests they should be. So you have to be professional. You have to finish the break strong, or finish the pre-break slate strong. You congratulate the guys going out to Utah for their all-star successes, and you go and sit on a beach for a few days and take your mind off of basketball if you're not part of that process. Thanks for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen today. Now make your second listen Game to Game NBA. Every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. The next time we're together, I will be here talking with you about Grizzlies Jazz, things that go well, things that don't go as well. We'll turn our eye to the All-Star break, check out some of the competitions that are going on over the next couple of episodes. Lots of good things to discuss. Obviously, Ja and Jaren, how they'll fit, where they rank perhaps among the All-Stars, all that sort of thing. Because it's always a hot button topic with Jaren in particular, whether or not he deserves to be an All-Star. Maybe I need to make the case for Jaren Jackson Jr. to silence all the haters out there and let Jaren know that he's got a believer in me, darn it. So lots of good things to talk about heading into the All-Star weekend, and obviously the Grizzlies-Jazz game will also be recapped on this next episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you again for listening, for viewing on YouTube. Like and comment. Continue to interact with us there. Rate, review, subscribe. We really do appreciate you making us a part of your NBA content, Memphis Grizzlies content experience. I know I speak for DeMichael. I can speak for myself as well, of course. It's appreciated. We're trying to make this show the very best show we can, and your feedback, your participation is a major piece of that. So thank you so much. We appreciate you. Until next time, hopefully you'll be back with me tomorrow. I'm Joe Mullinax. Stay locked in. Enjoy the game. This is Locked On Grizzlies.